So a lot of people have been criticizing self-help books recently, and honestly, I have some mixed feelings myself. Here's a few of the things that I've seen.
So I don't usually recommend self-help books because a lot of them say a lot without saying anything at all.
264 pages of the same thing over and over and over and over.
Self-help books are like the most shallow thing a person can read.
The self-help books are frying your brain cells. Back away from the atomic habits, please.
So I've actually read my fair share of self-help books, some that I liked, some that I did not, and I do have some thoughts that I think bring something to this discussion. We're going to start this video by outlining some critiques, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about why some people do enjoy them and see some of their perspectives, and by the end of this video, hopefully you have something to comment down below. Grifters and Gurus. One common criticism of the self-help genre is anyone can write a self-help book. All you need is a gimmick for an idea, a charismatic personality, and maybe even a ghostwriter. If you promise enough to the reader or to a big enough demographic, you can get some people to pick up a book just because of the overblown promises that you give them. Are you poor? Guess what? It's actually super easy to be rich. Oh, you lack confidence? Let me fix that for you real quick. Oh, you want to get some more babes? Let me teach you how to have them eating out of the palm of your hand. There's always a new set of techniques, a new list of 10 important attributes, tricks, hacks, get-arounds, and maybe even the occasional morning mantra to tell yourself in the mirror after you shower. And some of these people who might write books for the wrong reasons, I'm not going to say any particular person, are taking advantage of people who want advice on how to get what they want out of life and how to reach their dreams. And to me, if you're writing a self-help book to make money and you don't believe that you're actually really helping someone and you're just doing an overblown promised gimmick, shame on you. Gaming the system. We will get to the other perspective in a minute where we hear some people who love self-help books, but let me just give my own criticism of another category of self-help books that I personally don't particularly find useful. And this category of self-help books are books where I think that, you know what, the author might actually sort of be onto something, but as I'm reading the book, it feels manipulative and it doesn't feel like a way I want to live my life. I think of Robert Greene books when I think of this category, like if you've ever heard of the 48 Laws of Power or The Art of Seduction. I have read a good portion of the 48 Laws of Power myself, and I did read the entirety of The Art of Seduction, and these books might have archetypes that actually sort of make sense. They're ways that you can sort of have your own persona, your own charismatic vibes, so to speak, that attract people and seduce people and help get what you want. And you know what? Like, after reading those books, I do think that with subsects of the population, several of those actually work. For me, I personally can't handle it though, because it's manipulative and it feels evil. I feel like my soul is hurting whenever I listen to those books too much. And I think in The Art of Seduction, Robert Greene even mentions himself that they're short-term tactics. You're not going to get any long-term lasting relationship to function with any of those art of seduction archetypes he talks about, basically these different personas that give you charismatic advantage, that they all work in the short term and while you're playing the game.
That's not the game of life. If all you're after is manipulating people and deceiving them, the game will turn against you at some point.
And while I think that a lot of books fall into this and some of these tactics might actually work, do you feel good about yourself if you're constantly employing manipulative tactics and not forming real relationships that are, in a way, above board? This also makes me think of The Prince by Machiavelli, which was published in 1513 and was a book that ended up on the nightstand of a lot of world dictators. It's a book about being cunning, strategic, manipulative, obtaining power, keeping power, and having people under your boot. And just as a side note, if you're a history nerd, some scholars wonder if Machiavelli himself was being satirical when he wrote this book, meaning he was making fun of the ideas he was putting into the book. But regardless of if he was or not, we're never going to know. This book ended up on the nightstand of a lot of people that I do not admire. Some positives. A lot of people do enjoy self-help books and talk about them as being positive in their lives. I'll play a couple of clips from them as well.
These are, a couple of my favorite quotes. First quote reads, "Your tendency to identify with negative thoughts repeatedly is what allows them to grow stronger."
Within the first 10 minutes of reading this, I had an insight about how my brain works and how I'm causing my own suffering and anxiety for myself that have literally changed my life over the past 7 days.
This changed my marriage, it changed my parenting, it changed my relationship with how I am at work. The let them theory is going to make space for change to happen.
Learning life skills. So I mentioned it's not unheard of for me to occasionally pick up a self-help book. I don't personally read them all back to back over and over again because I do think that their usefulness is somewhat limited as far as binging them over and over again, but there have been some that I have read that I feel like have helped my life and have taught me life skills. I wouldn't continually come back and dabble in the genre if I didn't feel like there was anything useful to be found within it. A lot of us have dreams and a lot of us have goals that are hard to meet. And maybe you are personally over hustle culture and the grind, which makes sense to me and I understand that. But that doesn't mean that for someone who has a hard goal and doesn't know where to go with it, that reading a self-help book is bad. It could be a good thing. Not to say that people can't reach goals without reading a self-help book, but I also think a self-help book is a tool that someone could reach out to when they want to accomplish something hard. We're not born with life skills. When I was a teenager, I wanted to keep my grades up. There was a lot of different extracurricular activities I wanted to be engaged in. I was a church girl at the time, not so much now. And all of these activities coming together ended up being a little bit overwhelming. And yes, as a teenager, I probably could have taken a little bit of a chill pill. I was pretty intense. But I turned to the 7 Habits of Effective People or whatever that book is, but the teenager version. And while I don't agree with everything in that book, and I don't think any framework is easy to keep up 100% of the time for your entire life, I do still remember a couple ideas that I got from it that I did apply and did help me in that moment when I was young and I was learning something like time management. For example, I think that's the book that talks about separating your tasks that you need to do into ones that are important and not important, and into ones that are urgent and not urgent. You kind of have this little 4-square grid where you kind of think about what you want to do and how to manage your time. And then you know what you should do first and what you should prioritize and how to go about something that feels overwhelming from using this little reference. And I get that doesn't work for everyone, but that totally worked for me. And I will say, if I never learned any time management skills, this YouTube video would not exist, because this is not my full-time job, so there's that. On the flip side to the hustle culture, time management, self-help books that we like to kind of pick on sometimes, there's also self-help books that are about saying no. I've met so many people in my life who have had a really hard time saying no to things that they, in fact, did not want to do. I've met a lot of teachers that say yes to every single extracurricular event with their students to where by the time their head hits the pillow, they wonder if they have any of their life left for themselves. And sometimes a book that resonates with a person who's not able to prioritize themselves can be what they need to have a little bit of strength and a little bit of confidence to put their foot down and say, no, my life matters, and I can't do that. So I do think it's disingenuous when we put all self-help books in the same category. Some are about hacking your goals and adding a bunch of things to your day and making life complicated and taking cold showers. And some basically just try to help you shift your mindset through someone who walks you through maybe some of the cultural things that are ultimately hurting you. And you might not find a book you ever 100% agree with, and that's okay. I think part of this conversation is that many people assume that when you pick up a self-help book, you have to agree with everything said in that book or the book is completely useless. I completely don't agree with that idea. I think you could pick up the brand new bestseller that has some sort of 17-point life-changing plan, be like, you know what, most of this is trash, but still being like, I really like steps 7, 9, and 11, and if I apply some of those concepts to my life, maybe my life will be better. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, and we don't always have to have all or nothing attitudes when we talk about things that are supposed to make our life better. Education versus application. One critique that comes up again and again when you scan the internet for this topic is people who believe in self-help books often say, you know what, people don't believe in self-help books not because they don't work, but because reading a book does nothing. Applying the principles, it is what will change what happens to your life and maybe your outcomes. I found this Reddit thread, for example, and this guy basically said the exact same thing that I just said. He says, self-help books aren't a scam, people just don't want to put in the work. I get why some people roll their eyes at self-help books. There are definitely some cash grabs out there, but let's be real, a lot of them actually work if you take the advice and apply it. The problem isn't the books, it's people who read them, feel inspired for a day, and then go right back to their old habits. Yeah, not every book is life-changing, but dismissing the entire genre just seems unfair. If something helps even a few people get their life together, isn't that a good thing? And I do think the tendency to get inspired by a self-help book and then do absolutely nothing is very common. I've probably done that a few times myself where I'm like, oh, this is a great idea, and I proceed to change absolutely nothing in my life. And I'm not that mad at myself over that. I don't beat myself up by any means because I don't think any book is 100% truth, but that is a common experience. I would argue that most of the books that claim to know the secret to life have frameworks that are unsustainable, but like I said before, that doesn't mean that there isn't some truth to be gleaned out of a book like that. If you do constantly read self-help books, but you have a hard time applying them because you're getting a bunch of different ideas from a bunch of different people and a bunch of different perspectives, and then you look at your life and you're not happy, I would probably say slow down, maybe take it a little easy. Maybe stop reading so many if it's too hard to apply the principles that are being thrown at you because of the overload of information that might be coming in. I think it is good to feel inspired. I think it is good to feel motivated. I think there is value in that. We just need to always keep our brains on and remember that we can decide what value to take out of each of these books, especially when you might not agree with everything, or especially when you can't personally apply every single idea from a book to your life. You ultimately own your life, and you ultimately get to decide which ideas are helpful and which are not. Emotional support. A lot of people turn to self-help books when their life is not where they want it to be, and there is a downside to this for sure, because I totally think that there is a group of people who are there ready to take advantage of someone as soon as they meet a hard time. But not every self-help book author is a bad actor, and even if you do read a book by someone who had nefarious intentions, I still think that you can get something good out of it. When I was going through a career change and a divorce at the very same time, I read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and if you don't know who Ryan Holiday is, he basically just repackages stoicism for a modern audience. He does that on YouTube videos, and he does so on books. And when I was reading this book, I do think it really helped me in that period of life that I was in. And did I think it was perfect? Absolutely not. I think that The Obstacle is the Way is a really good message for someone who has a lot of obstacles in their way, because the idea behind the book is persistence and resilience and getting through things and finding ways around your problems that don't necessarily immediately come to mind. And for me and my personality, that was a good message. I do have some critiques for the book for sure, in that a lot of the examples feel cherry-picked, and some of it is survivorship bias. We go through a lot of people who ended up being famous or rich and all the problems they had in their life and the obstacles they overcame. This book obviously doesn't include the people who were persistent and tried to overcome the obstacles and ultimately failed as much, because that's not motivational, so there are downsides. But in the moment in life where I just needed someone to tell me to be persistent and keep going and try something new, it was good for me. And I hope I don't necessarily alienate people here. I don't care what your religion is, but I personally am ex-Mormon, and being Mormon for most of my life was a huge part of my identity, and leaving that behind was one of the hardest things I ever did. As I was going through this process, I picked up the book When Religion Hurts You by Dr. Laura Anderson, and it talks about the good things and the bad things that you might have experienced when you were sort of in a more structured, intense religious setting, and how you can sort of move on with your life if you decide that you no longer want that exact same setting, and it was very helpful to me. If you are Mormon, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable with that. It's just another anecdote that adds to this discussion that a lot of people turn to books that are in this category when they are sort of going through something, and for me, that was really, really helpful. If the book How to Leave the Mormon Church had been available at the time, I would have read that too. Final thoughts. I do think it's true that self-help books often say a lot of the same things, and they're sort of just repackaged from ancient ideas that we've had forever.
Let's get real here. Self-help books aren't necessarily bringing anything new to the table. They're basically repackaging ancient wisdom from religion and philosophy into a fancy new book in the airport.
Some people are grifters and gurus and write books that are definitely not worth reading. I do think other books in this category can be helpful to some people. At the same time, I don't feel like everyone needs to be reading self-help books all the time, especially if you feel like you have a good grasp on your life and you'd rather just enter a fantasy world and escape. I do think if we have attitudes sort of going the opposite direction, where self-help book readers are like, oh, you just want to read fantasy worlds, your little fiction doesn't do anything, that's also nonsense. I would personally claim that some books can be worth reading if you need to learn some basic life skills, or if you're going through a time that you don't feel like can be easily understood. I personally would not read a self-help book back to back to back. I think over time, there's not like you're just going to give yourself a little bit of decision paralysis with all the different ideas. I think if you're really into exploring ideas, it might be time to graduate to philosophy, but that's just my take. I do think a lot of these books are there when people need them, and I would always want them to have access to that resource. That's one opinion. What's your take on the genre? Is there anything useful with self-help books, or are the vast majority of them not very helpful and not worth your time?